There's a saying, the history of the railroad in Jeollabuk-do begins with rice. Where there was a big farm, there was a train station. Impi Station in Gunsan also transported rice produced from nearby farms to Gunsan port. Impi Station is the second oldest train station still standing. The station closed from May 2008. But it still symbolizes the history of rice exploitation. So what happened in Gunsan during the Japanese colonial period?
Gunsan is a port city which opened to international trade in 1899. Before that, it was just a small fishing village. But what was once a laid-back place with a beach later turned into the most flourishing city in the southwestern region of Korea. However, it's not an overstatement to say Gunsan's history after its port opening was led by the Japanese Empire.
Gunsan Port was an economic hub of Japanese business. It was only for exporting rice, unlike other ports. Rice was collected by force, gathered at Gunsan Port into mountain-high piles. Because of the sea level change during the ebb and flow, ships couldn't dock there. So the Japanese established a floating bridge to adjust it. 288 million kilograms of rice headed for Japan in 1934. Gunsan became a rice export port. Rice polishing and the warehouse business was booming, but the Japanese possessed it all. Money and rice had been flowing into Gunsan, while Japanese customs and banks were built, so the scenery of Gunsan was changing. It was a big issue that the main building of the old customs house in Gunsan was built with the red bricks imported from Belgium. At that time, there were two modern styles of building, Seoul Railway Station and the Bank of Korea head office.
군산 하면 우리 일제강점기 건축을 연상하게 되는데요. 사실 군산항의 경우는 대한제국의 의지로 개항한 개항장이고 그 군산에는 아직도 당시의 흔적이 많이 남아 있습니다. 특히 군산세관의 경우는 1층짜리 벽돌조 건물이지만 양식 건물로서의 가치가 매우 높아 최근에 국가 사적으로 지정되기도 했습니다.
The old customs house in Gunsan took charge of ship entry and tax work. When you walk into a main entrance in the center, there is a customer service. It's invisible inside and difficult to enter. What was the reason for that? It's related to the attitude of Japanese officials who worked at public offices or banks.
세관이라는 것은요, 모든 수출입 하는 상품에 세금을 매기는 곳이잖아요. 특히 일본인들은 이 민호인들한테 굉장히 고압적인 자세를 취했기 때문에 이 문턱을 굉장히 높게 만든 이유는 바로 민호인들이 함부로 여기를 넘나들지 못하게끔 하는 그런 의도가 있지 않나 생각하고 있습니다.
About 40 employees worked at the customs. Walking down the hallway, head of the customs office came first. Customs employees wore uniforms because of their judicial power. Civilians who visited were body searched. It must have been brutal. Nowadays, this building is used as Honam Customs Exhibition Hall. We can see a lot of references and exhibitions of old Gunsan port and its customs history. At one time, this building was faced with demolition. In the middle of the 1990s, a new customs office was built. There were two options: removing all traces of the Japanese colonial era and leaving for historical value what was there. Luckily, this building was left, and it's the only modern cultural heritage that shows the customs administration agency of the Korean Empire. The main building of the old customs house in Gunsan is Jangmi-dong. Jangmi is the same pronunciation as the word for rose in Korean, but it actually means rice storeroom. Rice was stacked up here, and there are many signs in Jangmi-dong which tell us about changes over time. There are many symbolic buildings in Jangmi-dong that show Gunsan's modern history. They are financial institutions for economic exploitation built by the Japanese. The Gunsan branch of Chosun Bank, built in 1923, was used as a bank during the Japanese occupation era. It was also once a commercial building. After remodeling, it became a museum of Gunsan modern architecture.
조선은행 군산 지점은 지역에 있는 그 은행 건축이지만 그 규모가 중앙에 있는 건물 못지않게 굉장히 큽니다. 그 얘기는 그 건물 자체가 군산의 경제력을 그대로 대변한다고 할 수가 있고요. 그리고 건축의 양식도 일반적인 건축과는 달리 정면의 형상이나 지붕의 모습이 굉장히 독특한데 일제강점기 건물임에도 불구하고 서양인들의 손에 의해서 만들어졌기 때문에 일반적인 일본 사람이 위한 건물과는 굉장히 다른 독특한 유럽풍의 건축 특징을 갖고 있습니다.
Gunsan is close by Gum River, and it was the final stop on the Gunsan Railroad. Because of its geographic conditions, the Japanese made it as a planned city. There's a unique storage facility behind Balsan Elementary School, built during the period of Japanese colonial rule, located in Balsanri. It's a two-story building and has a basement. It's got a kiwa roof and a concrete structure. There's a special story behind the name of the building.
여기에는 구일본인 농장 창고라고 적혀 있습니다. 근데 사람들은 이 창고를 시마타니 금고라고 불렀다고 합니다. 도대체 왜 창고를 시마타니 금고라고 불렀을까요? 아, 금고문이네요. 메이드 인 USA라고 적혀 있어요. 100년 전에 미국에서 이 금고문을 수입해가지고 달 정도로. 드디어 금고 안에 들어왔는데요. 이게 규모가 보통이 아닙니다. 아주 우리가 상상하는 이상인데요. 시마타니 농장에서 수확한 생산품들과 뭐 다른 어떤 귀중품들을 다 여기에 넣어놓고 지키고 있었던 것 같습니다. 규모를 보시면 여기 내려가는 계단이 있으니까 이 밑에 상계층이 있고요. 그리고 제가 지금 서 있는 곳이 2층이 되는 거고, 여기에 또 올라가는 계단이 있습니다. 이렇게 밟고 올라가는 계단이 있는데 여기 가면 이제 또 3층이 되는 거죠.
The rich farmer Shimatani Yasoya was mad for collecting Chosun cultural heritage items. He kept them in this storage area. The local people called Shimatani Vault the prison of our cultural heritage. Those stored items left a legacy. After the Japanese were defeated in World War II, when the Shimatani family went back to their homeland, they couldn't bring everything back because of its size. It wasn't only rice that Japan stole.
Gunsan's original city centre, made up of Shinheung-dong, Wonmyeong-dong and Jangmi-dong, were the most expensive neighbourhoods where the wealthy Japanese landowners would gather around and form a town. There are still a lot of houses remaining which used to be Japanese property, and in Korea they call these joksan-gaok. These joksan-gaoks not only show us what the Japanese lifestyle was like back then, but they also suggest a painful history.
Joksan-gaok means houses owned by the Japanese in Korea during the occupation era. After Korea's liberation from Japan, most joksan-gaoks were sold to Korean people, and they were kept from then on. These days, the term Japanese houses has replaced joksan-gaok. A joksan-gaok meant a house left by the enemy in the past, but now jok is reinterpreted, meaning regaining property, rather than the property of the enemy. A Japanese-style house in Chunheung-dong, Gunsan, is a two-story wooden house built by Hirotsu, a Japanese draper. It's been used for movies and dramas very often.
보통 우리가 일제강점기 때에 일본인들의 집을 일식이라고 이야기하지만 대부분의 경우는 근대화된 일식주택인데 반해서 히로스 가옥은 전형적인 일본의 주택의 특징을 갖고 있습니다. 그래서 가운데에 있는 큰 공간 외에 복도가 바깥으로 있다든지 일본 건축의 전형적인 특징을 보여주기 때문에 일본인들이 식민지 조선에서 어떻게 살았는지를 보여주는 굉장히 희귀한 주택 형식이라고 할 수가 있습니다.
There are many traces of exploitation during the Japanese colonial era in the old downtown. The city of Gunsan is like a museum. The tunnel of Haemang that connects to Gunsan Inner Port also shows the history of exploitation.